Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Bob Lee from 107.5 WBLS and the Make the Grade Foundation for Education. You're listening to Rudy Radio.
The views and opinions expressed during this program are entirely those of the show's hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of Rude Rangers Entertainment, its investors, management, advertisers, or staff.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Acupuncture is My Life. Now, in today's episode, I'd like to discuss both the functions of the large intestine as well as patterns that accompany the large intestine. Whereas when the large intestine falls into a certain disorder or begins to not function properly, I want to go over a few causes of that, but first we'll get into discussing its functions, which isn't many, because the large intestine basically has two functions. And normally, as an acupuncturist and preparing to discuss the functions of the internal organs, I have to request that my audience temporarily block their understanding of the Western concept of the internal organs completely, because to an acupuncturist, the internal organs function somewhat different than that of the Western concept. Because a lot of, well, I won't even say a lot, but in treating patients and reestablishing homeostasis, to an acupuncturist, the theory of yin and yang serves as the core in their perception of functions of the intestines as well as what can cause disturbance. Okay, because it's all about, once again, balance of yin and yang. You see, yin is cold, yang is hot, and when they're balanced, there's normal body temperature. Your body is well regulated at a point where it can heal itself. But when the yin aspect falls out of line or creates an imbalance, or the yang aspect even falls out of line or creates an imbalance, disease or disorder usually ensues. So to some extent, there's not much of a difference in the functions of the internal organs, but there just is. And I enjoy expressing the functions of each internal organ so that you can gain an understanding as to how things work, how an acupuncturist views and diagnoses a patient. Now, and also keep in mind, and I say this over and over, an acupuncturist understands a person's constitution is unique. No other person's constitution is the exact same, not even your parents or your children or even your siblings. And I won't say with the laws of nature being stifled or disrupted, but I'll say this. Before the advent of medicine, so to speak, humans understood this. Nature educated them to this fact. I don't want to stray too much. I want to jump back into the functions and patterns of the large intestine. And I also want you to know the large intestine is a yang aspect of the lung. Okay, so the lung and the large intestine have a relationship, a yin and yang relationship with each other, because the qi from the lung descends to the large intestine in order for the large intestine to perform its functions. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Now, those functions there are two main functions of the large intestine. Acupuncture is my life. And they do, in some sense, appear similar to the functions in Western medicine. But I will say this, many of the functions of the large intestine from a Western medicine perspective are very similar to many of the functions of the spleen and liver from an acupuncturist perspective. Now, if I lost you with that statement, after listening to this episode, go back and listen to the functions of the spleen and the functions of the liver, or better yet, you can even go to the Acupuncture is My Life YouTube channel to get a real in-depth understanding of the functions of the spleen, the functions of the liver, and how it's similar to Western medicine's understanding of the functions of the large intestine. Okay. Now, the two main functions of the large intestine are that it controls both passage and conduction, as well as it transforms stools and reabsorbs fluids. Now, when it comes to controlling passage and conduction, the main direction of chi in the large intestine is down. Because when you're moving your bowels within that long tube, ultimately, even though there's an ascending colon and a transverse aspect of the large intestine, as well as a descending aspect, from mouth to anus, ultimately the chi of the large intestine goes down. So any type of stagnation of chi of the large intestine tends to disrupt the downward movement of chi of the large intestine, causing abdominal distension as well as constipation. So when you're constipated, an acupuncturist would understand that there's some form of stagnation of chi in the large intestine. It can be liver chi stagnation that's stagnated in the large intestine, or it can be chi stagnation of the large intestine. This is why I said, go back and listen to the functions of the liver, or watch it on the YouTube channel. It'll begin to connect. Now, when it comes to transforming stools and reabsorbing fluids, the large intestine is responsible for the final transformation process of forming stools from digested foods, which is then excreted from the body. Now, you see, the large intestine reabsorbs some of the fluids from the stools that are formed, but the right amount must be reabsorbed. Because if the wrong amount is reabsorbed, there'll be problems. Let's say, for instance, too much fluids are reabsorbed from your stool. This can lead to constipation, which can then create a myriad of other issues. Because when you become constipated, there are individuals who don't move their bowels for, let's say, 4 days, 6 days. These toxins that are building up as a result of sitting there Because you have to keep in mind, what goes in must come out. So what you're eating must eventually come out. And if you're not moving your bowels, and you know what, you should move your bowels 3 times a day. If you're eating 3 meals a day, you should move your bowels 3 times a day. Many individuals move their bowels twice a day. Okay, fine. A lot has to do with quantity at that point. Could it be the equivalent of having moved your bowels 3 times? But now, to an acupuncturist, if you're eating 2-3 meals a day and you move your bowels just once, technically you're constipated. And it shocks so many individuals. So many individuals. And it creates all types of issues because this toxins build up from stagnated feces in the large intestine. And this goes back into a person's blood. And it results in a myriad of disorders. So this is part why I say, if the right amount of fluids are not reabsorbed, it can lead to problems. Now, if too little fluids are reabsorbed, this can result in loose stools or even diarrhea. Which can be a problem as well because excessive diarrhea can dehydrate you. You can lose electrolytes as a result. Now you have heart problems. Now you can have heart problems if you're releasing too much in the way of electrolytes. But other problems can come. You can become dehydrated. Among other things. So this again is why I say the right amount of fluids have to be absorbed. Not too much or not too little. But those are the 2 main functions of the large intestine. It controls passage and conduction, as well as it transforms stools and reabsorbs fluids. Now, any issues, or I can say patterns, but any issues with the large intestine have a lot to do with disruption of bowel movement. Not moving your bowels enough can be bad. Moving your bowels too much in the way of, listen to the connector, in the way of diarrhea can also be bad for you. But what the general causes of problems or general causes that can create problems with the large intestine is, one is cold. And even cold is an exterior pathogenic factor. It's cold outside, so forth and so on. Like when it's freezing out and you're outside too long, cold can bypass. If your defensive chi is weak, and here's another form of chi that's derived from postnatal or post-heaven chi. This is why, again, I say spleen and stomach is responsible for all other aspects of chi within the body. Now here is defensive chi. Because if your defensive chi is strong, it's hard for you to get sick. It's hard for exterior pathogenic factors to affect the body pierce the exterior layers and affect the internal aspect and cause problems. Now, at worst, if your defensive chi is strong, when it comes to exterior pathogenic factors, it may cause a temporary fever, which is part of defense mechanisms, because the body will bring body fluids to the exterior level, cause you to sweat, push the pathogens off of the exterior level. This is what defensive chi does. This is why you sweat, you get fevers. It's not always good to suppress a fever because your body is fighting against an exterior pathogenic factor. But now, when it comes to the large intestine, it can be affected by cold if your wei chi, your defensive chi, is weak. Being exposed to this cold, let's say over a long period of time, and especially if it's accompanied by inadequate clothing, you'll get sick. But it can go directly into the large intestine. Another exterior pathogenic factor that can affect the large intestine directly is cold. Dampness is a combination. As a result of sitting on a cold ground for a long period of time, where it works its way up from the lower burner, because that's where your behind is, your butt, whatever you want to call that, lower chow, to an acupuncturist. It can work its way up and into the large intestine and then cause abdominal pain as well as diarrhea. And there are a lot of cases where lower abdominal pain, and I'm going to emphasize children here too, are usually due to interior cold as a result of being affected by exterior cold. Now, the dampness part, invading the large intestine, or affecting the large intestine, can be as a result of wearing inadequate clothing in the cold and damp weather. And again, when a person sits on the damp floor, the ground that you're sitting on is damp. Emotions can affect the large intestine as well, because sadness causes chi to become deficient. And when you have deficiency of chi in the lungs, when you have deficiency of chi in the lungs, it in turn affects the large intestine, because as I stated earlier, lung chi goes down to the large intestine to allow for the large intestine to function properly and move excretion or stool through the large intestine to be excreted, to be excreted from the body. Now, worry can affect the large intestine too, because it stagnates chi within the large intestine. Whereas there will be symptoms of, let's say, abdominal distension, pain, constipation, and then when you do move your bowels, it'll be those little bitty pebble-like stools that'll alternate back and forth with diarrhea. Now, anger can affect the large intestine because, anger, frustration, resentment causes chi to stagnate. And I'm quite sure you're aware, diet affects the large intestine as well. Except, when you eat too much cold, raw foods, this is another way in which you can experience interior cold that causes diarrhea. not just being exposed to external factors such as exterior cold, inadequate clothing to cover and protect you, or sitting on the ground. Cold raw foods can do this too. And this is something to be conscious of for individuals that are heavily into dieting and eating the right foods. There are individuals that love to just juice as meals, or just eat raw vegetables and fruits all day, every day. You have to be careful. Too much of anything is no good. What else affects, and an acupuncturist understands that affects the large intestine when it comes to diet, is excessive consumption of greasy foods, because greasy foods gives rise to dampness in the large intestine in the form of damp heat. Ever move your bowels sometimes and there's just this liquid that comes out and it's just hot. It feels hot. That's called damp heat. That's considered to be damp heat. When there's damp heat in the large intestine, there will be, which is a full pattern. You have full patterns and you have empty patterns when it comes to large intestine disorders. But damp heat in the large intestine is considered a full pattern, because there will be abdominal pain that even after a bowel movement, it's still there. There'll still be a sensation of abdominal fullness. There may be some diarrhea, mucus, as well as, in rare cases, blood in your stool. And the odor, it would smell terrible. As well as, I just said, burning of the anus. And it'll be this dark, a small amount of urine, but it'll be dark yellow, as if it's a sign of dehydration, or it can just be dampness coming out. And there'll be some obstruction in the urethra. Bladder, that's only allowing you to emit dark urine. There'll be fever, and you'll sweat, but it won't reduce the fever. And you'll constantly feel hot and thirsty, but you won't necessarily have a desire to drink liquids. And it'll sort of like be a heaviness feeling of your limbs and your body. It's a sign of damp heat in the large intestine. What can cause that? One, diet. Excessive, like I said, consumption of hot and greasy foods, which tends to lead to the formation of damp heat. But you know what else? Alcohol. Can serve as a cause of this pattern as well, because you have individuals who drink alcohol every day, and there will be those days where it's in excess, and it's not good. Everything in moderation, although I don't agree with drinking alcohol. Okay, we're all human. Super special occasions is fine. Try and replace it with tea. Quality, good tea, organic tea. But what else can cause damp heat in the large intestine? Emotional strain, issues with anxiety, worry, over an extended period of time can cause interior heat. You see, retention of dampness in the large intestine tends to affect the absorbing function of fluids. Remember I said not too much should be absorbed and not too little. And in this case, fluids will not be absorbed in its appropriate amount or necessary amount, and diarrhea will result, and there'll be mucus in the stools, which again is indicative of dampness. Whenever you have mucus in your stools, to an acupuncturist, that's a sign of dampness, and we speak about this extensively on the Acupuncture is My Life YouTube channel. cases such as this, I myself, as well as other acupuncturists, will look to clear heat, resolve the dampness to stop the diarrhea. But dampness doesn't have to accompany the heat. You can just have heat in the large intestine where there'll be constipation with dry stools, burning sensation in the mouth. You'll have a dry tongue, and there'll be burning and swelling of the anus as well. Again, this can be caused by an excessive consumption of hot foods. See how diet plays a huge part? Notice how diet is playing a huge part. In the case of just heat, not heat dampness, but heat in the large intestine, an acupuncturist would clear heat in the large intestine and the stomach and promote the production of body fluids. Super important. Super, super important. You can also have heat obstruct in the large intestine. It'll be constipation, burning in the anus, abdominal distension, pain that's worse when you apply pressure to it, fever that increases in the afternoon. Pay attention to that. That's key, because that'll tell you it's heat obstructing the large intestine. And there'll be sweating, a lot of sweating, especially on the limbs. But that usually happens when you're in the middle of a febrile disease. That's when that usually happens. And I stated in the beginning, cold can invade the large intestine. It can affect the large intestine, where there'll be sudden cramping, abdominal pain, diarrhea with pain, and a feeling of cold and cold sensation in the abdomen. Again, this can be due to exterior cold affecting the large intestine directly. Or if a person is sitting on a cold and wet surface for an extended period of time, or just being exposed to cold weather and you're not wearing enough clothes. There can also be, these are all full patterns. There can also be chi stagnation of the large intestine, where there's abdominal distension and pain. There'll be constipation with those little tiny stools, and a person would be irritable. There'll be aggravation relative to the condition. Again, diet. Diet plays a huge part. Eating processed foods or eating in a hurry, eating while you're working, eating while you're standing up. These things can lead to chi stagnation of the large intestine. Emotions such as anger can play a part. An acupuncturist, or I myself, can look to move chi of the large intestine. There's also empty patterns such as large intestine, dryness of the large intestine, where there's dry stools that's difficult to discharge. You'll have a dry mouth, dry throat, bad breath, and dizziness. That's a sign of dryness in the large intestine. There are several empty patterns that are tied to the large intestine. I'll say even another one, collapse of the large intestine, where there's chronic diarrhea, prolapse of the ani, hemorrhoids, tiredness after bowel movements, cold limbs. You won't have an appetite. You'll feel mentally exhausted, and you'll only desire to drink warm liquids and even rub your abdomen. You experience those symptoms. Those are what an acupuncturist would call collapse of the large intestine. It's another empty pattern. See, once you get to fully understand how the internal organs function, what can affect the internal organs, you'll be able to connect that with when I discuss diseases from a Western medicine concept as to how it's to be interpreted. And you'd know what symptoms to look out for. And you would look to see an acupuncturist because you should see an acupuncturist on a regular basis. And I say this all the time. regular wellness visits and your annual visit with your physician, you remove a lot of concern for health issues. You really do. This is why I'm always saying to you, you must make acupuncture a part of your life. Because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?